Take away the flags, the borders, and the GDP metrics, and you are left with a fundamental question. What actually is a country? At its core, a nation is a coordination system. It exists to solve a single survival problem, maintaining organized complexity against the natural pull of entropy. And keeping that system alive requires a shared story, a guiding national myth. To measure the health of that system, researchers developed the complex adapt as model state framework. By treating societies as thermodynamic structures, the CAMS model revealed a precise pattern of failure. Societies do not usually collapse because they are conquered. They begin to collapse when their material reality stops matching their cultural memory. Every society runs on two interacting engines. The fast loops handle daily material survival: trade, manufacturing, workforce, and military. Attached to that is the slow loop, which operates on a generational scale. These are your institutions, your cultural records, your deep governance. The slow loop generates the guiding myth that gives the fast loop its purpose. When those two loops decouple, the state's physical actions no longer align with its foundational story. The system begins dissipating more energy than it can coordinate. This creates severe thermodynamic strain across the society's structural nodes. In May 2026, researchers ran a CAMS data ensemble covering 226 years of institutional history across 7 major powers. The results act as a structural MRI, allowing us to see exactly where the bonds are holding, where they are snapping, and which nations are currently standing on the brink of structural death. The data reveals a clear spectrum of civilizational health, starting with the anchored. In these societies, the national myth remains firmly tethered to the state's operational capacity. Because their self-image matches their material reality, they possess a deep resilience against external shocks. The United Kingdom profiles as the highest functioning system in the dataset, the patient archivist. Post-imperial Britain operates from an unusually high memory posture. It relies heavily on inherited records, deep legal infrastructure, and constitutional forms. Its pragmatic myth of unsentimental continuity allows it to channel political energy efficiently, maintaining high coordination even during economic slumps. Russia presents a very different anchored profile, classified as the armored mind. Here, the cultural myth is defined by the idea of a perpetual existential siege. This deep script civilizational narrative produces genuine institutional coherence. Helm and archive coordinate well, and the legitimacy system remains perfectly balanced on an affective knife edge, neither in surplus nor deficit. The myth of civilizational siege has become a functional reality, providing the coordination required to keep the system mobilized under duress. For these anchored nations, the civilizational story remains actively tied to the state's physical reality. They can absorb trauma, process it through their institutions, and maintain their shape without shattering. Moving down the spectrum, we find the strained. These societies are running on inertia. The gap between their guiding myth and their physical economy is widening, causing visible fractures in the social contract. Germany sits here as the uncertain engineer. After 1945, Germany rebuilt itself entirely around craft and rule as redemptive substitutes for mythic grandiosity. But today, its physical trade and economic circulation are deeply distressed. The practical economy that justifies its orderly procedural civic model is failing to deliver material results, leaving the psychological contract between the population and the institutions under extreme pressure. Argentina carries a unique psychological burden in this tier. Profiled as the exhausted body, it operates under the eternal return of betrayal, a wealthy nation that repeatedly rebuilds from crisis, only to watch its institutions decompose all over again. Argentina's repeated physical economic failures have dropped the system into a thermodynamic freeze. Almost every node, labor, resources, and governance, is operating near absolute zero. Decades of collapse have severely degraded the society's ability to learn from its past, forcing an abandonment of its own institutional memory. Thailand presents the gilded shield. The nation is caught in a tension between a hyperactive military apparatus and a collapsing institutional memory. Because its traditional myth has become too complex to manage organically, the military explicitly handles physical coordination to compensate for the vacuum in civil governance. Strained nations are surviving on borrowed time. Their foundational myths are exhausting themselves, proving incapable of repairing the physical nodes that keep the society fed, sheltered, and secure. At the bottom of the dataset is the terminal state of the CAMS model, the disassociated. These are nations where the mind completely detaches from the suffering body. Sweden registers here as the anxious philosopher. The nation built its identity around the myth of an achieved utopia, a highly ordered, consensual model. Facing mounting migration stress, severe welfare pressures, and security anxieties, the physical reality is degrading. Sweden exhibits a condition called late abstraction. The society debates its problems in highly sophisticated, symbolic terms, but it lacks the concrete operational capacity to actually resolve them. The system thinks intensely about its physical struggles, without fixed material outcomes. But the most alarming dataset in the 2026 ensemble belongs to the United States. Profiled as the severed head, America's guiding myth of providential destiny and rational self-governance is now completely disconnected from its operational capacity. This graph shows the U.S. from 2010 to 2026. The Helm, Archive, and Craft plunge synchronously. Helm coherence drops to a near-terminal 0.4. As civil nodes fail, the security apparatus becomes the backbone. The shield's capacity is 3 times the average, a Praetorian condition. A disassociated nation is trapped in a fatal contradiction. It continues to speak in the language of greatness and constitutional order from inside a burning house. When the narrative floats away from the architecture completely, it leads towards systemic fracture. Look at the 2026 data as a whole, and the global scope comes into sharp focus. We are witnessing a coordination capacity gap between major powers that surpasses even the mobilization era before the Second World War. The historical record shows that external shocks, world wars, Great Depressions, natural disasters, are entirely survivable. Nations can lose their wealth and their infrastructure and still recover. But the internal death of a guiding myth is terminal. The math of the CAMS model leaves no room for sentimentality. Thermodynamic reality will always override a failing national narrative. A society cannot simply narrate its way out of physical degradation. The ultimatum for these failing powers is absolute. They must either undertake the agonizing work of rebuilding their physical foundations to match their grand myths, or find the courage to write a completely new story. Because a severed head cannot dream its body back to life.